In this week's Technique Tuesday video, I'll demonstrate two methods of maintaining a seed stitch pattern in the round when working multiple decreases per round, as for the crown of a hat. As always, if you'd like to jump right to a specific point in the video, there are direct links down in the description. So the first method that I'm going to demonstrate uses spiraling decreases. Now the line of decreases is very visible, but it's intentional, and it's the same sort of line of decreases that you would see when you were working in a stockinette hat, for example. So you have these definite visible decrease lines, but within each of these sections the seed stitch is maintained. So I'm going to show you how to set up for this and then how to work the rounds. So typically when you are working seed stitch in the round, you have an odd number of stitches, and that's so that you can maintain the stitch pattern continuity when you transition from the end of the round to the beginning of the round. So in the little sample hat, you can see that as I work across from the end of the round, of one round, to the beginning of the other, the stitch pattern continuity is maintained, and that's because I'm using an odd number of stitches. So what you want to do is divide your round into equal sections. It's very possible that you won't be able to divide exactly equally, and particularly if you have an odd number of stitches, that's not going to be possible, but you can get close. I'm going to divide my round into fourths, but a hat is often divided into eighths, so you get as close as you can to having an equal number of stitches. So you might have, say, 3 sections that have 12 stitches and then 5 sections that have 13, and that's fine. But you want them to, you don't want any section to be more than 1 stitch different than the other sections. So in my case, I have 39 stitches. So I'm going to divide my round up into sections where I have 10, 10, 10, and then the last one will be 9. So if you are working on a standard size circular needle, like a 16-inch circular needle, and you're not using magic loop like I am, you don't have cables sticking way out dividing the round in half, you will want to use a different color marker at the very beginning of the round than you use for all the others. That way, when you are working your decreases, you will know when you are back at the beginning of the round. So you might use, say, a green marker at the beginning of the round and then orange markers for all of the other sections. In my case, I only need to divide each half into half. So the color of markers I'm using doesn't matter so much. So I've divided my round into 4 equal sections. And again, you might have 6, you might have 8, you might have 10, you might have some other number, and it's probably not going to be exactly even. You're going to have some that will have 1 stitch more than the other, or 1 stitch fewer, like I have. So for your setup round, for the sections where you have more stitches, in my case I have 3 sections that have 10 stitches. For these sections, I'm going to work my seed stitch pattern all the way until I'm 2 stitches before the marker, and then I'm going to work a knit 2 together. So I have 2 stitches remaining. I have a knit and a purl. I'm going to work these as a knit 2 together. It doesn't matter what these 2 stitches are in what order. These 2 are going to be worked as a knit 2 together. I slip my marker, then I work the next section maintaining the seed stitch until I get to the last 2 stitches. And once again, I'm going to work a knit 2 together. Now I have one of the shorter sections. This section started with only 9 stitches. So I'm again going to work in seed stitch until I have 1 stitch remaining. So I have 1 stitch remaining, and it happens that this is a purl stitch and I should work this as a knit in order to maintain the seed stitch pattern continuity, but it doesn't matter. Even if this was already a knit stitch underneath the needle, I would still work this last stitch as a knit. So now I've completed my setup. From now on, every time I work a decrease round, I'm going to work the last 2 stitches before the marker as a knit 2 together. On rounds that are not decrease rounds, I will work the last stitch as a knit stitch. So that is going to continue. There's going to be, in a typical hat crown, you usually work a decrease round where you're working around 8 decreases, and then you work a round where you're not working decreases. As you're alternating back and forth until you get very close to the end, and then you're working decrease rounds every round in order to keep the top a little bit more rounded. So what I showed you is going to create this kind of a look. So the decreases are moving left, they're spiraling to the left, and that's because you're using the knit 2 together at the end of the section. If you wanted these spirals to go in the other direction, you wanted them to move left, instead of working a knit 1 or a knit 2 together at the end right before the marker, instead you would either work a knit 1 or an SSK at the beginning of the section, and that would create a left-leaning decrease. And as you worked them decrease round after decrease round, the line of decreases would move to the left across the fabric. For this second method, what we're going to do is work decreases that are essentially invisible. You can kind of see that something's going on there, but it's really not, it's not a defined line like we saw in the first method. So this time I'm going to divide up again. I'm going to have 3 sections that have 10 stitches and 1 section that has 9, but I'm going to divide it up a little bit differently just so that you can see what happens when you have unequal numbers of stitches. So I set it up so that I have 9 stitches in this first section, and then I have 10 stitches in each of the others. You might have a situation again where you have 3 sections that have 12 stitches and 5 that have 13, something like that. You may not have just one section that's different. So I want to show you what happens when the stitch counts are different, or if you have an odd number of stitches in a particular section. So the way we work this method is that when we are working a decrease round, we look at how the first stitch would be worked in pattern. So I've got a purl, knit, purl here. So the first stitch is a purl under the needle. So to maintain seat stitch pattern, that would be a knit 1. But I'm going to knit 3 stitches together. I'm going to work a knit 3 together. So I have pretty pointy needles, and so I can get in there pretty easily. If you have a short taper or blunt needles, this might be difficult, but I'm working the 3 stitches together, and then I work the rest of the stitches as they need to be worked in order to maintain the seat stitch pattern. So I'm going to slip my marker, and once again I look at how these stitches are presenting. And I've got a knit stitch here. That means I need to work a purl 3 together, because this should be a purl stitch to maintain the stitch pattern. And to work a purl 3 together is kind of tricky. So it can be hard to get get the yarn around and pulled through all 3 of those stitches. So what I like to do is to slip the first stitch as if to purl. Just slip it, you're maintaining the stitch mount. Then you just purl these 2 stitches together. And then you can pass that slip stitch right over the top, and that creates your purl 3 together. Let me show you how you can do something similar if your knit 3 together is kind of difficult. Let's say you needed to start a section with knit 3 together and it's really difficult to do so. Instead, you can start with a knit 2 together. So you can knit these 2 together. And then you're going to return this to the needle. You want to make sure the stitch mount stays okay. And then you can pass this stitch over like that. And then again, you can slip the result over here, and that will create your knit 3 together. So when I'm using these double decreases, I'm still working 4 decreases per round in my case, but I wouldn't do them every other round like I was doing the single decreases. Instead, I spread them out, so I do them every 4th round. So I do a decrease round, then work 3 rounds without decreasing, and then work a decrease round. And that spreads the decreases out vertically and it keeps them from being so bunched up together, because a double decrease does really scrunch some stitches together horizontally. And if you are also doing that vertically by having them decreased every other round, that really kind of disrupts the stitch pattern continuity a little more. It's just more obvious, even though the decreases are still invisible, the disruption to the fabric is visible. Now, these are not the only two methods of maintaining seed stitch when working in the round, but they may be the easiest. Either method can work really well depending on the look you're trying to achieve in your project. If you have any comments or questions about today's video, or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below, or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rox Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.